So it's time for another What Am I Sowing and Growing video, and this one is going to cover the period July and August. Just an outline plan really for August and a reasonably detailed one for July. I'm going to skip through it fairly quickly because there's a lot of stuff going on in this period. This is now when we're really focusing on sowings for autumn, winter and spring, and we've already got a huge amount of the growing space dedicated to that same period. Everything is so slow in winter and early spring that you just need a huge amount of stuff planted at this time of year. So yeah, let's fly through it. So I'm going to do some late Savoy cabbage. I haven't got any Savoy cabbage at the moment, but I'll just have some space opening up. These cabbages won't grow very big, but I like that really because I find that a big Savoy cabbage is really difficult to get through. So smaller ones are the order of the day for me. I'm doing a last batch of carrots. These again won't grow very big. I quite like that though for salad carrots. Ideally they'll get to be about 1 centimetre. And I'm going to do 2 batches, one of Touchon and one of Eskimo. The Eskimo ones will be in spring, the Touchon ones in winter. I'm doing another batch of chard. I've already got a really nice bed of chard outside, but it's in a shady spot and it won't do very well again over winter. So I want some chard that will go into a brighter spot. And so that's what that batch is for. And now I'm going to do my first sowing since early spring, really, of pak choi and tatsoi and joy choy. But I won't do very many of those because they still stand a decent chance that they might go to seed, being a little bit early. And I don't have that much space for them, to be honest. But anyway, I'll do a few. Some of them will go into the beds, and then some of them will actually just go into hanging baskets. And I've got this spot in my garden where I can put loads of hanging baskets. And of course, they're nice and high up, away from flea beetle and away from slugs and snails. So at least that's the idea. Because, you know, both flea beetle and slugs and snails really love Asian greens. I'm going to do some Radicchios, both for salads. They just add a kind of nice crunch and visual sort of interest to the salad mixes as we get sort of late autumn and early winter. It's a great time really for Radicchios. In fact, it's the only time I bother to grow them. I'm going to try terrain peas, just a small number, just to see how they do. Apparently they don't get downy mildew, which is a big problem with late peas. Anyway, we'll see how they do. I'm going to do a late sowing of potatoes. There's no, potatoes store really well in the compost. We harvest them all the way from like August all the way through until the end of March, and they're just great. The quality is great. So there's no real reason to do Christmas potatoes, something that you can harvest at Christmas now, because you could have done them back in April and they'd be just as good. The reason that I do just a small number, maybe 10 pots of late potatoes, is for the period end of March to end of April. And in that period, I find a late sowing does a little bit better because they don't start to, because of dormancy, they don't start to reshoot in that period. They only start to sort of reshoot towards the end of April. And of course, by the end of April, we've got our true early crop of potatoes. So it just gives us continuity of supply. Parsley for the polytunnel. Parsley does really well outside all year round, but the quality and the growth rate of parsley in the polytunnel is just unsurpassed really. So I really like to do that. Starting to do my spring cabbages. I'll do a few successions of those. What I like to do is I like to sow them double density, and then I take out every other plant and transplant it into another bed later on, and that just allows me to find enough space basically in sort of late summer for the number of cabbages that I need, because I've got a lot more space in autumn. I tend to transplant them about October time. Cabbages, they don't mind being transplanted at all late on in the year. Do the same sort of thing with some collards. I'm still not convinced that collards are a great crop, but I'm just giving it a go because they look interesting, and a lot of people that I know Really like them. So I haven't really grown enough of them yet to make a judgment. If we don't like them or we don't grow enough of them, we'll always have our sort of staples, which are the winter and autumn cabbages and the kales. So we'll see how they go. Guardsman is my favourite salad onion this time of year, actually most of the year. But it's a bit expensive, so we'll also do White Lisbon, which is, it's really, really cheap, and it's not that much worse than Guardsman. Our Asian spinach, true spinach, is basically a write-off in summer. Asian spinach does really quite well. Ours is just starting to go to seed now. We've probably got one more crop off it. It won't do well in the middle of summer though, and so we don't start our Asian spinach again until about mid-July. So we're sort of planting it out mid-August. By then, the chance of it going to seed is quite low, at least for 6 or 7 weeks. So we'll get a good sort of harvest period off that. Doing a nice batch of lettuces. I'll just pop up the varieties there so you can see them. What I call Radicchio, Grenoble Red, Novara and Canasta, all really good lettuces for winter. And then I'll do another batch of the same varieties of Asian greens, Joy Choy, Red Pak Choy and Tat Soy. But these are going to go in the polytunnel. So in the space that they're going to go in right now, I've got dwarf French beans and carrots and beetroot. So they will all have been harvested by the time these are ready to go out, about the middle of August. And then about the middle of September, they'll be ready for harvest. Or the Joy Choy will probably be a few weeks later. And that means I get a nice harvest period of those just before I need to replant the whole of the polytunnel to all of the winter salads. So it's a really great, really fast kind of catch crop in the polytunnel. It's worked really well for me in the past, so got good chances of it working again. And then I'll do a late batch of these same peas, terrain peas, and I'll do those in the polytunnel just in a container. I won't do very many, basically just enough peas for the odd one meal a week or something like that. So let's take a look at August. So August is when there's a huge amount of focus now on getting the timings right for veggies to eat over winter and in autumn and into winter. So I will do my second batch of late celery 1st of August, and it won't be ready this year. So it'll overwinter in the polytunnel, but it'll be ready in really early in spring, sort of about the middle of March sort of time. And so it's a really nice early crop. That is about the time when my overwintered celery is looking pretty shabby, and this will look great, and it'll go all the way through until I clear it out of the polytunnel, and then I've got my early crop of celery ready. Do some more chard, just a small amount again to go into the polytunnel. I like to have a mix of different things in the polytunnel, mainly because if the weather is really foul, and we can't get out to the low tunnels and the coal frames and things like that to harvest, often because they're frozen shut, I can always get in the polytunnel, and so I can always get a reasonable harvest of stuff from the polytunnel. So that's why I like to have a right range. A bit more parsley, guardsman, again, salad onions, just loads and loads of successions of things now. We don't do radishes for harvest in summer, midsummer, but we do start them again about the beginning of August. So they will be ready for sort of planting out, sort of towards the end of August, and we'll be harvesting them in sort of, early September to mid-September. And that's cool. Weather's cooling off by then. They're not as spicy. They don't kind of, get really big really quickly or anything like that. And I really like Scarlet Globe, and so we'll be doing Scarlet Globe all the way through the year, all the way through winter and spring. We basically, have radishes all the time, apart from July, August, and early September, which, as I say, I think is the worst time to grow radishes. But salad rocket, not a huge fan of salad rocket, but it's nice to have a little bit of something different in the salads. Turnips. So again, like radishes, we don't do turnips in midsummer, but we'll start them again, just the same as radishes, beginning of August. We'll be eating those again in sort of late September time. It's interesting with turnips that they're quite slow growing by comparison with radishes. So although I'll do a small number at the beginning of August, I'll do a large number towards the end of August and early September, because they're so slow growing. It's better to get them sort of, to this sort of size, and then they'll just hold at that size for months in the ground and, still be great eating. So, with turnips, try and get them all, most of them sown by the end of August or very early September. And then, as I say, you can eat them almost into winter, really. More cabbages. We do lots of successions of spring cabbages. Lamb's lettuce. So lamb's lettuce is a fantastic winter lettuce, much more nutritious actually than true lettuce, but much less prolific. So that's the reason we don't grow it all year round, and it does tend to go to seed quite quickly. But over winter, it doesn't. It'll stand there in the ground, and you'll be able to harvest it from sort of November time all the way through January and February. By March, true lettuce is kind of prolific again, and so we don't have any more. But we need to sow a lot, so we'll probably have about 4 trays of lamb's lettuce, and that'll, as I say, last us for that whole period of winter and very early spring. And then we're back on to our main sowing, really, of the Asian greens. Again, red pak choy, joy choy, and tatsoi. Tatsoi actually is my favourite. I love it in salads. And this is going to go in low tunnels and cold frames and the polytunnel. Yeah, and we just harvest that all the way through late autumn and winter. And then we'll actually sow another batch really early next year, and that's the stuff we'll harvest all the way through spring. We do have a little sort of gap in about sort of March time when we haven't got any, but for most of that period we'll have Asian greens. And then this is my first sowing about the middle of August of true spinach again. I find anything before the middle of August and it just runs to seed still fairly quickly. So that's not always the case. It kind of does depend on what the weather's like in August and early September, but mid-August is always really reliable for me and I get a really good harvest. But that is just my first sowing. I have loads of sowings of spinach because I need it to come ready when I've got space, and because so much of my spinach that I eat over winter and in early spring is going to go into the low tunnels that have currently got the peppers in, and the peppers are sort of gradually cleared through October, and so spinach gradually goes into those low tunnels through October, which means it gets planted through sort of late August and into sort of September, middle of September sort of time. So it's all about getting your timings right. Spinach takes about a month from sowing before it's ready to plant. And then I've got winter miner's lettuce. So winter miner's lettuce is another really nutritious lettuce, but it's not as prolific as true lettuce. It's got these little tiny leaves. You sort of snip off big clumps of it. But it's really nice. It's really succulent and really kind of, not crisp would be the wrong word, but it's got a nice texture to it. It feels quite succulent really, but it's super healthy. And so we really like that. You can grow it outside, and this first batch will probably go, some of it will go outside, some of it will go in the polytunnel. But what we find is that when it's grown outside, there can be quite a lot of cleanup required of it in order to get it, in eatable quality. When it's grown in the polytunnel, it tends to not require really any cleanup. And that's the difference. So we'll be growing quite a bit of it in the polytunnel, but we'll still have a couple of beds of it outside as well. It's really good. And then a whole range of lettuces. These are what I think of as the last of the summer lettuces. So they'll start off just outside unprotected because they're going to be sown sort of mid-August and then planted out mid-September. We're going to be eating those then all the way through October. Can get a bit cold in October, so they'll go in a bed that will eventually have a cold frame top or a low tunnel top over them to protect them. And we'll eat those all the way through October. And then we'll take those out, because by then all the polytunnel lettuces will be ready, and these will be kind of coming to the end of their life. They'll be a bit exhausted, and and then I'll plant probably something like late sowing of spinach in that bed. So yeah, loads of varieties. You can see them here: flashy butter oak, Grenoble red, really red deer tongue, Radicchios, canasta and Navarra. Now, not all of those lettuces do well over winter, which is one of the reasons why I'll be taking them out and putting just the ones that do well over winter into the polytunnel. And then in late November, I'll sow another batch of lettuce, and they're the ones we'll be eating in early spring. So more successions of Scarlet Grove and Tokyo Cross, and you'll notice the numbers of Tokyo Cross are increasing. So I'm doing 40, a full 40 cell tray, 3 turnips each. It's worth reducing the number down to 3 turnips in each cell later on in the year, so that they all get a little bit more light. You can do 4 to a cell earlier on in the year. Guardsman, yeah, mentioned that before. Another batch of salad rocket, of lamb's lettuce. And then I'll start some white Lisbon. I find the white Lisbon does a little bit better later on in the year. And I'm into planting a lot of my salad onions into cold frames, low tunnels, the polytunnel and all that sort of thing. But I always try to do some outside and some undercover from each batch. And that gives me a nice kind of staggered harvest. And it does mean that if we get a particularly warm or sunny autumn, that they don't grow too big. The ones outside grow a little bit less than the ones under cover. Yeah, more batch. And then I think the last thing on the list, not quite, is tough ball. So the most suppliers of tough ball say to sow it the end of July, and then another batch in early August. Now, what I've found this year is that literally every single seed of tough ball, no matter when I sowed it, all went to seed. And so I'm a bit cautious now with climate change as to whether those sowing dates are right now, because if overwintered onions get too big by the end of February, then they stand a good chance of running to seed. And so if you sow them kind of, as I said, late July, early August, and then we get a warm winter and then a warm spring, they just get too big and they go to seed. So I'm going to do one batch, this batch a bit later, but because it's going to go planted into a spinach bed or something like that, and it'll be under a low tunnel or a cold frame, then it'll catch up a little bit, but it won't catch up enough to be too big later on in the year. So that's the first thing I'm doing with my overwintered onions. The second thing that I'm doing is that this year, I sowed a batch in December and I planted it out in March, and I harvested it yesterday actually, and it was a fantastic harvest. So effectively, the end of June, beginning of July. So there's not a lot of point if that technique or sowing time works consistently, and so I'll try it again this year, then I don't really know why I bother sowing it all the way back in sort of August and taking the risk of it going to seed and taking up bed space all the way through October, November, December, January and February, when I could just be sowing it in December, planting it out in March, and then of it only taking up bed space from March, and that means I get a whole new whole set of beds free over winter to plant something else. So, you know, that's like a double benefit. I still get it a month earlier than my main crop onions, and there's no chance of it going to seed because they're going to be really small by the time they get planted in March, and they get an extra crop. So that seems like a win-win-win to me of doing it a bit later. So I'll be trying that again, but this year just worked splendidly. But just as a hedge against that not working next year, I will do this slightly later sowing in the end of August. And my grow lights have just gone off, and I've just finished because the last thing on my list is the next successional sowing of Giant Winter, which is my favoured true spinach. And yeah, that'll just go in a cold frame or a low tunnel after a batch of peppers are cleared. So that's me done. My name's Steve. This is the Seaside Kitchen Garden and Allotment channel, and I'll see you soon.